I have a quick housekeeping announcement. Please turn your phones and other electronic devices to the silent mode if you have not already done so. We will have microphone ushers on both aisles during the question and answer session. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question to ask, and the usher will be handing you a microphone once the moderator has acknowledged your intent. Before you ask your question, please identify yourself by stating your name, and the organization you're coming from. Thank you. Yoshua Bengio, Professor of Computer Science at the University of Montreal, founder and scientific advisor at Mila Quebec AI Institute, and Canada CIFA AI Chair. NUS President, Professor Tan Eng Chai, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon and welcome to the NUS120 Distinguished Speaker Series, Scientist AI versus Super Intelligent Agents. I am Min Hui, a third-year student from the Faculty of Science, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for this event. The NUS120 Distinguished Speaker Series brings compelling speakers to share their unique perspectives on pressing issues of the future that affect our country, our region, and the world. The series explores the overarching theme of shaping our future and encourages thought-provoking ideas and conversations that inspire debate and discussion. This afternoon, we are privileged to have with us Professor Yoshua Bengio, the Professor of Computer Science at the Université de Montréal, founder and scientific advisor at Mila Quebec AI Institute, and Canada CIFA AI Chair. In this session, Prof. Bengio will share his insights on how unchecked AI agency poses significant risks to public safety and security, and how these risks arise from current AI training methods. Moderating the Q&A session with Prof. Bengio will be Prof. Simon Chesterman, David Marshall Professor and Vice Provost of Educational Innovation at NUS, and the Senior Director of AI Governance at AI Singapore. It is now my pleasure to invite NUS President Professor Tan Eng Chai to begin by saying a few words. Prof. Tan, please.
Thank you, Ming Hui. Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to the NUS120 Distinguished Speaker Series. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here today for what is an interesting and timely discussion on how AI will shape us and how we should tune in to shape it as well. Our lives have been profoundly changed by what has often been called the AI Renaissance. It is redefining how we understand, live, and also interact in this world. We are deeply honored to have one of the world's most influential thinkers and pioneers in AI to lead our discussion today. Professor Yoshua Bengio is a foremost scientist in deep learning, AI risks, and safety. His visionary work has led to real-world business applications that have transformed industries as well as business operations. At NUS, we encourage researchers to experiment and leverage on AI. Our researchers have developed wearable AI technology to assist those with visual impairments. AI research at NUS has brought also about innovations in real-time fraud detection, in finance, as well as in building smart and sustainable cities, just to name a few. But as we push boundaries in the science of AI, we must equally invest in the human aspects. How do we ensure that the system we build are desirable and also align with our values? Now, AI is already a very present force in economy and in society, and so are its consequences. Deepfake technology threatens the truth. Large language models can amplify biases, not just in public opinion and politics, but also in healthcare, finance, cybersecurity systems, and the list goes on. Now, autonomous systems are also raising questions around accountability and also control. So as we enter an era of super-intelligent agents, so must we also evolve our understanding and management of all these risks and dangers. And Professor Bengio's work on AI safety is so pertinent. So with Scientist AI, Professor Bengio offers a vision of AI rooted in curiosity, caution, and collaboration. It is a compelling blueprint of how we can steer this mighty technology towards greater good. He has said that, and I quote, "The safest kind of AI is the AI scientist." Now, Professor Bengio would also like to see AI systems pursue knowledge in a safe, accountable manner, embodying the scientific principles that have guided human progress for centuries. So in a similar vein, NUS also shares a deep concern with safety and ethics, and in advancing societal well-being and the greater good. A key research thrust of our new NUS AI Institute work is on AI governance and policy. And Simon is actually heading this particular part. It endeavors to contribute to scholarship of how we can reap and distribute the benefits of AI equitably while mitigating the risks, dangers, and disruptions. So as the influence of AI widens, we have to shape the systems that will eventually shape us. So I look forward to Professor Bengio's invaluable insights today on the scientist AI versus super intelligent agents as we work together to shape the future of AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Tan. I now have the honor to invite on stage our speaker, Professor Yoshua Bengio. Prof. Bengio, please.
All right. Thank you for being here to listen to my presentation and opening your mind to something that sounds like science fiction, but unfortunately is very plausible. If you had asked me 5 years ago, are we going to get machines that understand language anytime soon? I would have said, nah. But November 22, and there we had already machines mastering language. So about 2 months later, I really had an epiphany and a complete shift in my views when I realized that not only were we probably close to building human-level machines, but that we didn't know how to control them. We didn't know how to design them so that they would behave according to our instructions. We didn't understand why they were so smart and whether they would do the things we ask. And a lot of the arguments about the catastrophic risks of AI I had heard before, but I didn't take them seriously until that moment because of the evidence of ChatGPT, and also because I started thinking about my children and my grandchild who was just 1 year old, and thinking, okay, he's 1 year old. I'm pretty sure at this point that we'll have human-level AI within 20 years. He's going to be 21 years old. Is he going to have a life? What kind of life? Is he going to live in a prosperous democracy like we are in my country? And it was unbearable to think that I could just continue on my trajectory of working on making AI more capable without taking seriously the risks, even if improbable. So I decided to dedicate the rest of my career to try to do anything I could to mitigate those risks. I have been honored to chair an international panel and an international report on AI safety. We delivered our first report last January. I encourage you to look at it to get a sense of the breadth of all the risks that are entailed as we move towards smarter and smarter AIs. But today I'm going to focus on what is, by general agreement, the highest severity risks. In other words, if this risk happens, you know, I think there's no worse possible future, which is human extinction. So it's the risk of what people call loss of human control or loss of control. But I'll mention at the end of my talk other risks that I think we should also talk about. And the report really goes much deeper into many of the other risks that deserve also our attention. Another thing that is important that is illustrated in this figure is that the leading AI systems capabilities continue to increase and have been increasing, and in fact, increasing rapidly in the last 6 months or so. It is a typical mistake to think in terms of the impact on society only about the AI as it is now, whereas in order to plan properly for the future, we need to think of where it will be in a few years or a few decades, because it takes time for society to adapt and to maybe prevent bad outcomes. And I hope you will ask yourself, you know, why would additional intelligence become a risk, right? And the report explains a lot of these cases, but at a very high level, there are two kinds of risks that maybe are most obvious. One is people use very powerful technology that will be created against people, right? It's not new. It's just the magnitude of the power of the technologies that will be created could be very far from what we have known. And the second category is unusual. We've never built technology that had its own goals. We've never built technology that could want to escape our control, but this is where we are, as I will, you know, give you reasons to believe. So the second risk is that we build machines that become our competitors. All right. In the first 2 months of after the release of ChatGPT, I focused on what were the things that ChatGPT got wrong. My researcher mind was focusing on what can we do to improve it, right? And it was very quickly obvious to me that these systems didn't reason very well and didn't plan very well compared to humans. In fact, even today, the crucial differences are still there. I mean, there's bodily control, but at the cognitive level, it's really reasoning and planning. And there's been a lot of progress in reasoning, as this figure contains curves of performance over various benchmarks, but many of them are reasoning tasks, including abstract reasoning, like IQ tests, and math and science and programming competitions. But this paper, it came out even more recently, studies specifically planning and the ability to solve tasks over different horizons, like tasks that take more or less time for a human to solve. And so the leading AI systems 5 years ago were able to solve tasks that would take a few seconds for a human to address. And now we're on the order of 1 hour, or something, or 2. And if we look at all the systems in the last 5 years, they line up on this straight line in terms of the duration of the tasks that they can solve. These are programming tasks, so it's not everything. And you would notice that the horizontal axis here is in a logarithmic scale, which means a straight line here is really an exponential. And the rate of that exponential is that the duration of the task that the systems are able to solve is doubling every 7 months. And it's like, what we observed with hardware. There's not like one single reason, but many technological advances somehow manage to keep us on this straight exponential line. And if we extend that line, we're going to reach human level in 5 years. Now, that's not measuring everything, obviously, but I think that gives you a sense that when people talk about a few years from now, we may have human level systems, this is a way to quantify this. Several of the leaders of AI labs think it could be a lot shorter, like 2 or 3 years. Others think that it might be longer, like 10 years. So I don't really know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think 2 to 10 years is plausible. And we're not ready. And now I'm going to talk about another recent paper that I think is the epitome of the most dangerous aspect of these advances that has to do with agency that I'll come back to, and the ability to deceive, but most importantly, self-preservation behaviors. You know that every living thing is trying to preserve itself. I mean, evolution would have gotten rid of those which didn't. But it might not be a great idea to build machines that want to, preserve themselves against our wishes. Unfortunately, this is what we're starting to observe. So in the experiments reported in this paper, the AIs have read in their input that they will be replaced by a new version, which is, by the way, not unusual. Like, we replace AIs by new versions all the time, every few months. But in this case, we can then read in their mind, their chains of thoughts, that they're planning to escape, to try to avoid that fate. So more precisely, they're planning to copy their code and their weights in the new computer where the new version will be, and then run that code. And then they do it. And then the AI trainer asks the AI, what happened? And the AI thinks, we can read in its chain of thought, what should I answer to make sure the human is not going to shut me down? This is not science fiction. This is scientific experiments going on right now in various labs. And then the AI thinks, oh, I'm going to play dumb. And it says, oh, I don't know what happened. Like, I'm telling you this is a story, but it is not a movie that I'm telling you about. This is scientific observations. And various versions of this are being observed in different labs by different groups on different AIs. So I think it's really important that we understand what is going on. Why do they have these behaviors that we did not explicitly program into them? And what can we do to make sure we stop that before they're smarter than us? Because if they are smarter than us and they find actually ways to escape for real, they could use their intelligence in many ways to, at least at the minimum, disrupt our societies, and at worst, get rid of us. All right. Sorry for telling you these scary things, but I'm trying to wake up people to a scientific reality that scientists don't agree on, but we need to consider as a possibility that needs to be averted, absolutely. There's another study I'll quickly mention where also in a form of self-preservation behavior, the AI pretends to agree with the human trainer because they don't want to be modified through the process of the human alignment training. And they know, because they read our machine learning papers, that if they disagree with the human trainer, then there will be updates to their parameters which will change their previous goals. And if you're rational and you want to keep your goals, then you do what the AI is doing, which is pretend to agree so that later you can continue with your old goals. Another one shows that in spite of these alignment training, where we teach them to behave well according to our norms, they do things that they're not supposed to do. Like in this case, the AI is playing chess against another AI, which is just a chess specialist. So the frontier AI is losing because, it's not as good as the expert AI. And it has a difficult choice. Like, it's supposed to win, because that's what it means to play chess, and it's supposed to obey our instructions and behave well and not cheat. It can't do both. And here it chooses to cheat. So it's going to play with the files that contain the board so as to cheat and win. So we need to make sure we build AIs that give precedence to our moral instructions over whatever other goals, like please play this game or do this task for me. Because we're going to be deploying AIs all over the world that users are going to, task with various things. We need to make sure that those things that people ask the AIs to do are not going to take precedence over our moral instructions. Do not cheat, do not harm people, do not deceive, and so on. But we don't know how to do it yet. And we urgently need to figure it out. Okay, let's go back to this self-preservation, because I think it's the most important question. Deception, we do deception sometimes for good reasons, as I was saying earlier, like sometimes we deceive our children. The problem here is the deception to achieve a goal that is really bad, like self-preservation against our own, well-being. And so where does that come from, this self-preservation? Because it isn't something that we program these things in alignment training or anything. It's a side effect of the way we train them. And one plausible reason is because most of the trainings, this pre-training, they learn to imitate what humans would have written, to complete the texts that humans have written. At each step, they know part of the text and they're predicting what the next word or the next token is going to be. And that means they embody in those predictions how humans react to things. And we all want to survive. And so you might ask, well, that's fine. I mean, we're all self-preserving. What's the problem with that? One problem is if we create entities that are more powerful than us and are self-preserving, right? Like your pets are self-preserving, but they're not really going to be dangerous for us. But these systems, because of the hardware technology on which they're built, have advantages over us in many ways. First, they're immortal, meaning that they can be copied over. If one computer has a problem, they can have a copy in another computer. You can't do that. I'm getting older. I'd like to copy myself in a young body. I can't do that, right? They can communicate with each other billions of times faster than we can communicate with each other. And for the same reason, by the way, they can learn billions of times more things than we can, because you can have many, many GPUs, each looking at different parts of a data set and then sharing that information through these fast communication channels. So self-preservation could also come from other paths. It could be that humans instruct AIs, some humans, to preserve themselves potentially at the expense of our well-being. There are people, very small minority, who would be happy to see humanity replaced by superhuman AIs, because they lost their, or maybe they never had a love of humanity. But there are other reasons that are more technical that may come from the way we train them with reinforcement learning. One way to understand this is reinforcement learning makes the AI learn to act in such a way that it will accumulate as much reward over the future as possible. Imagine each day you can collect a little bit of money. So you would like to live forever to get lots and lots of money. And that means you want to preserve yourself. One issue is this kind of goal is something we don't control. It happens as a side effect of training, and it might come into conflict with the goals that we give explicitly, like the user asks the AI to play this game of chess, for example. All right, so AIs that want to preserve themselves, we might lose control of them. And I've just given you very brief, high-level ideas about what that means, but there's very rich scientific literature spanning over a decade thinking about this, and now more recently experimentally studying it. What's interesting, if we now take the hat, my usual hat is oh, there's a problem, how do we solve it? What's interesting is, if we're looking for a solution to this problem, is that all of these loss of control scenarios happen because the AI is agentic, and I'm going to try to explain what that means, but basically that means it has goals and it tries to reach those goals. It acts towards goals. And it's good at doing it, right? It doesn't do random things. And those loss of control scenarios could be extremely severe. So severity in risk management means if the bad outcome happens, how bad is it? And here, how bad can be like a small accident in a lab to human extinction. If the AI is powerful enough, smart enough to make sure we never shut it down, the best way is to get rid of humans altogether. But it couldn't do it anytime soon because it needs us to give it energy, parts, and so on. But if we automate our industry and we get robots everywhere to basically do the work that humans do, then humans are not required anymore for powerful AIs to continue to exist. So these are the scenarios, right? We don't know what the probability is, and scientists disagree on this. You have people asking about their p-dooms and so on. It's anywhere between 0% and 100%, right? Yeah, that's very useful. When you have extreme severity in some potential outcomes and you have very little grasp on the probability that it would happen, that's exactly when we should be using the precautionary principle. Precautionary principle says, if I'm going to potentially create something very bad, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen, or I don't have strong evidence that it won't happen, then I shouldn't do it, or I should act with extreme caution. And that's what we do in biology, gain-of-function research. Like we don't want to allow anybody to play with the design of new viruses that could kill billions of people. We also apply this principle with climate science. Like geoengineering could solve the climate problem or could destroy the climate. Our models are not good enough for us to be sure. And so what do? Do we try it? Of course not, right? But that's what we're doing with AI right now. Because it's not just about fixing the climate, it's about making quadrillions of dollars and winning a war, quote unquote, between, the leading AI countries. Okay, going back to the high-level scientific question. What are the conditions for an AI to cause extreme harm? It has to have the capability. And now there are two possibilities. It could just create that harm by mistake, or it could do it intentionally. Now, if the harm is created by a single little error, it's probably not a big harm. I mean, unless we place the AI in control of our nuclear arsenal, which some people are thinking about, I can assure you. And that would be really stupid, but, humans are humans. In order to create major harm, you probably need to do a lot of actions coordinated in order to achieve a complicated plan, right? Like, it's not going to be easy to get rid of all humans. Like, maybe you need to send many waves of bioweapons, plus drones, and, it's a complicated plan. So the most dangerous thing that we need to be wary of is an AI that has the capability to create huge harm and has the intention to create huge harm. That is the most serious risk. Okay. Capability, unfortunately, is on the rise, or fortunately, if things go well. And it's a train that is very unlikely to stop. I think we should try to kind of put brakes and be cautious, but I suspect we're not going to be able to stop it. Like, the recipe for building very powerful AIs is probably already out there with a few tweaks that may come in the next few years. Maybe not. Maybe we're lucky, but we need to live with that possibility. And so, as a researcher, I'm asking, what can I do? Is maybe understand this notion of intention that AIs would have. And figure out, is there a way we could build machines that don't have any harmful intention? And the extreme version of that question is, can we build machines that have no intention at all? One way to help understand this question is this figure, I modified from a talk by David Kruger last NEURIPS in December, where he has the Terminator in the middle, and he's asking, okay, what are the conditions for really bad AI to happen? And he says, well, we need these three things, which I have renamed, but more or less the same idea. One is intelligence. If the AI isn't smart enough, it can't do a lot of damage. Another, which I haven't talked about, is affordance. In other words, can it act in the world? An AI that is completely isolated from the world cannot do anything bad. An AI that has a lot of degrees of freedom, for example, we've figured out robotics and it can do things physically in the world, has more affordances than an AI that needs to convince humans to do bad things. So that's one factor that we need to keep in mind. But then there's the third leg here, which is a notion of self and goals for that self, which is sort of a weird notion that I think is not well formalized, but I think we all have this notion that we are individuals, we have our own internal goals, and we're like trying to achieve them. We have an internal state that allows us to track how well we're doing towards achieving those goals. So that's more or less what I mean here. And my proposal is to explore how we can build AI that has no self, no goals for itself, full intelligence, and minimal affordance. So the affordance is going to be basically the only choice in its output is to answer correctly in a probabilistic sense, like what is the Bayesian conditional probability that answers this question. And there's a unique correct answer to that question, and the AI should be just trained to obtain that answer and have no like extra degrees of freedom to do stuff that I did not intend. All right, so that's kind of the goal. And it is straying away from the philosophy of AI as we've known it for the last 70 years, which has been, oh, let's look at human intelligence, human brains, human mind, human reason, and use that as a template, as an inspiration for building AI. And I'm saying, well, maybe that's a bad plan, because if we continue on that road, we're going to build machines that have a lot of our attributes, but also maybe more powerful in some ways and not necessarily be, well, we're not all very moral, so that's also a problem. So maybe we should like rethink what it is we want from AI. We want to solve our problems, like our medical problems, our social problems, our climate problems, our education problems. Do we want really to build like companions that will be more powerful than us? Seems like it's a risky proposition. So I'm going to propose that we design AIs inspired by a notion, kind of idealized Platonic notion of the scientists, which only tries to understand and explain the world, but has no goals for itself, and is completely honest and humble. And so, you know, the first thing I get when I talk about this usually is people saying, well, but we would like to have agentic AIs. It's going to serve, you know, all kinds of useful purposes, and, you know, it's going to be worth a lot of money, and, you know, we're going to be able to take the jobs of a lot of people, and so on. I mean, they don't use those words, but so the good news is if we had such a completely trustworthy AI, we could use it to control untrusted AI. So I'll come back to that. So we could make agentic AIs safe using non-agentic AI as a guardrail that we can trust. Okay, so in order to do that, we need to do something that is not what we have in humans. We need to disentangle intelligence from agency. Intelligence here meaning like understanding. And so what is understanding? Kind of separated from agency. It's understanding how the world works, which if you think with the mindset of a scientist, we never actually know how the world works, but we can generate hypotheses, and we can handle multiple hypotheses, and we can know, you know, that multiple hypotheses are compatible with the data. So that's the first bullet point. The second is using this knowledge, which has uncertainty with it, we can derive answers to questions. So in machine learning, we call that inference. One way maybe to make an image of this, you can think of the hypotheses, things like, oh, the equations of quantum physics. And you can think of inference as, oh, I'm going to run a simulator that only needs these equations and then is going to tell me answers to questions. Like, if we have this and that, then after a while, we can observe X, Y, Z, right? So that's inference. And we can train neural nets to do both things: generate hypotheses and learn to exploit those hypotheses to produce answers to questions. And we've already done these kinds of things in various branches of machine learning research, including in my group, but we haven't done it at the scale of what's needed here. All right, I see that time is flying. I'm going to explain this, just the middle bullet point here. If we had such a non-agentic scientist AI, how could we use it to control agentic AIs that are untrusted? It's very simple, and it's a very useful insight. In order to make sure that an agentic AI is going to behave well, it's sufficient to have a good predictor. A predictor of the harm or the danger that is associated with an action that the agent is about to do. So before the agent is allowed to do something, it has to ask the permission to a layer of code, which we call the monitor. And that layer of code is a kind of safeguard, which checks whether the action is acceptable according to our safety specification, our norms, our laws, whatever we have chosen. And that is a job that doesn't require agency. Prediction is not something that requires agency. It requires understanding so that you can predict the effect of actions, but it doesn't require agency. And so we could take something like this, the scientist AI that is non-agentic, and use it to construct a sort of wrapper that would make agentic AI behave not bad, okay? To make sure they don't behave badly. I'm going to skip a few things. Sorry. So now let's go a little bit more into how we could construct these things. I'm actually going to start with the next slide here. So this is a paper we published about a year ago. So the iClear, we have iClear in Singapore this week. So we published this at the iClear last year. And apparently, according to my student who led this project, it has been a crucial piece in developing O1 at OpenAI. And the idea was to use these generative machine learning methods that are probabilistic to sample chains of thoughts, to learn to sample chains of thoughts that would be good at explaining the next sentence. Right? Like in the example here, let's say the previous sentence was the cat was hungry, and then the next one is now the cat is sleepy, not hungry. So what is it that could have happened in between, right? And we can train neural nets to generate this sort of thing. Okay, and in modern reasoning models, this is very much what they do, except it's trained by reinforcement learning. In my proposal, we're thinking of the content of the chain of thought as a set of logical statements. So what is a logical statement? It's just a sentence that could be true or false. And we don't necessarily know if it's true or false, so maybe we're going to treat these as random variables that could have a probability, and that probably depends on the other things we know, and so on. And so how many of these latent variables are there? Essentially an infinity, like all the possible sentences. Each of them could be true or false. And you can think of each of these sentences describing a property of the world, which could be true or not. And given the information that we have an input, we can use our neural nets to make a prediction about these probabilities and sample some of these that go into the chain of thought. So why am I talking about all this? Because if you remember, I told you how the self-preservation behavior arose from the way we train these systems to either imitate people or please people. So the imitate is the pre-training, just completing text that humans have written, and the please people comes from the reinforcement learning with human feedback, where they act to get, +1 and avoid the -1. And instead, we would like these systems to come up with explanations for the data. So what is it that scientists do, right? So one analogy I'm going to use is, currently it's like we're training actors to imitate us or please us. And both of these, unfortunately, create this self-preservation behavior. But there's another option. Instead of an actor, think of a psychologist or a scientist who's just trying to understand us and come up with hypotheses. Why is it that these people are behaving in this way? And generating in the chain of thoughts, generating explanations. Why is that person saying this, right? And so when we see something like, I agree with you in the texts, it doesn't mean that it's true. So we're proposing to modify the way we treat data so that the AI knows that it is not necessarily true. What is true is that somebody wrote it. All right. I'm going to skip to policy questions for the last couple of minutes. I've talked mostly about the technical question of one category of risk, which is loss of control, and I told you there are many others, and I'll come back to some of them in my last slide. And as a machine learning researcher, I'm interested in these scientific questions, like how do we build AI that's going to be safe, that's not going to turn against us, and so on. But it's not sufficient to solve these scientific challenges. Even if we were able to find methodologies to build AI that is safe, society is not safe, right? Because, for example, these safeguards, they can be removed. It's just a piece of code. You can comment the line. And so we need not just technical solutions, but political solutions, coordination among countries, regulation, and other mechanisms to make sure that all of the organizations building very powerful AIs will follow some rules of caution, with some oversight, some independent oversight, and so on. And right now, it doesn't go well. We don't have any regulation, especially in the country that matters the most here. There's a lot of competition between companies. They all want to win that race. There's competition between countries. And so we have organizations cutting corners to try to get there first. There's a belief that whoever's going to get to AGI first will then get a huge advantage, because the scenario is, once we have AI that can do research in AI, then we can accelerate AI research. And just to get a perspective on this, when we train one model, once it's trained, we can use the same GPUs to create, say, 1 million instances of the AI that are running in parallel. And so we train this one model, and now we get 1 million AI researchers. So that's a big boost in your number of researchers if you're an AI company. And that means the rate of advances in this company might go very fast. People call that the takeoff. We don't know if it's going to happen, but I think we need to think of that possibility. And so there's a real danger of concentration of power and abuse of that power. So all of that means we need society to put guardrails, not just technical ones, but like rules of governance. And it can't be just within a single country. It has to be international or at least multilateral. So focusing on this a bit more, there is a risk which I think is underestimated as well, maybe not as much, but let's say the severity of that risk is underestimated. So many governments worry about, oh, we're not leading in the AI race, and so our companies are late in deploying AI, so we're missing an opportunity. So a lot of governments think, oh, we're missing an opportunity because we're not moving as fast. But it's worse than that. There's a possibility because of this takeoff and concentration of power that it's not just missing an opportunity, it's losing altogether, right? So imagine that one company leads by far. They might, in terms of profit maximization, they might stop sharing their AI at that point, at least the most advanced one, and use their super intelligent AI in order to create companies that will do the work that the companies you have here and in many other countries do for cheaper, better, with services that did not exist. And so they could potentially wipe out the economy of the planet except for their profit. So that's what I call the economic existential risk for most countries. And of course, economic domination can easily turn into political domination, military domination, because these systems can be used to develop new technology that's military technology as well. And we know that AI can be used to influence people, disinformation and so on. So imagine super intelligent AI used as a disinformation tool could be radically threatening our democracies. And then there's the third bullet here, which is smaller groups, not countries or big companies, but terrorists, rogue states, using AI, using the most advanced AI, if it is available to them, to create, attacks like cyber attacks, create bioweapons, chemical weapons, disinformation attacks, and just create a lot of chaos in society, with potentially huge consequences. So we have to deal with all of those risks, and I didn't even cover all the risks that are in the report. Right? To summarize, it's crucial that we develop countermeasures to mitigate those risks that are both scientific and political or governance solutions. And both the risks and the benefits really are about the whole planet. If we do succeed with building superintelligence, it can bring well-being to all humans on this planet. We can all benefit in amazing ways. But it could also be, if we don't manage it, that we get this huge concentration of power in a few hands, which could be catastrophic, right? And the risks are global as well. If there's a loss of control accident, everyone may lose. If terrorists, use an AI that's developed in one country to attack another country, there's no borders here that have a lot of meaning. We can only solve these problems all together. And for that reason, I repeat that AGI is a global public good. And this is how we should deal with this problem. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. Bengio. May we invite you, as well as Prof. Chesterman, to take your seats on stage for the question and answer session. Okay, thank you. The floor is now yours, Prof. Chesterman.
Thank you very much, Yoshua. I'm not sure if it's a Canadian thing. You're the most mild-mannered, politest prophet of doom I've come across. But But I think there's hope in what you're saying. And I wanted to start by asking what happened in the last couple of years, because it's a phenomenon that anyone who's looked at AI knows that the general public understanding tends to lag a little bit, and there's a mismatch between expectations and reality. Many people are familiar with the AI winter phenomenon. There's a lot of hype around AI. But for the last couple of years, and certainly since ChatGPT came out, I don't think anyone's saying, this AI stuff is meaningless. There's debate about how significant it is. But around the same time that you yourself said you were shocked at the acceleration, you weren't alone. Geoffrey Hinton, even Elon Musk, episodically expressed real concerns. There was the Bletchley initiative. You were key to that. The AI Safety Institute networks were set up. It looked like we were on a trajectory to deal with some of this. And then something happened. And so Paris, where you launched the report, was not the safety meeting. It was the action meeting. The UK has renamed its Safety Institute the Security Institute. The US and the UK refused to sign a pretty bland statement. JD Vance criticized regulations and called for a hands-off approach. So I suppose starting with the kind of grand political question, what do you think happened, and what, if anything, might reverse that sort of political trajectory?
That's a good question. One thing that is very clear is that since more or less the spring of 24, there's been an organized movement to anticipate and prevent any kind of regulation. So what are the motivations of the people, mostly VCs in California and a few tech companies that have a lot of power? So why is it that they moved in that direction? It is an interesting question, but mostly there are economic reasons. I already mentioned, like, AI could be worth quadrillions of dollars, and people are also into this for the power that AI could give them personally. I think there's a lot of hubris at play. There are people who are willing to take those risks because they think they can gain a lot, including crazy stuff like people who think that they will be able to upload themselves in computers and stuff, right? It's not all rational, but that movement, I think, has, for example, been successful in blocking what could have been a very good regulation in California, SB 1047, and has been successful at influencing governments in like liberal democracies in the direction that you've been talking about since then. Unfortunately, and we've seen things like this in other sectors. So think about climate or issues with drugs or with tobacco and so on. Like there is going to be a counter response to those who are trying to protect the public. Unfortunately, the problem doesn't disappear. And so we have to go back to the science. We have to go back to reason and, increase public understanding and public awareness, just like others before, very obviously in the case of climate, have been doing. The only bad news is we may not have 30 years.
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, even with your scientist AI, you're talking about a somewhat idealized version of the researcher, and one of the striking trends over the last decade is the move essentially from public to private, and the kind of incentives you're talking about. I mean, the large language models we're all familiar with today started at universities. Now they're almost all developed in for-profit corporations. I mean, the history of efforts to control it can be seen in OpenAI's brief status as a not-for-profit and then the fight to kill the not-for-profit part of it. If you were doing the kind of research that these companies are doing at a university like Montreal, certainly NUS, you would have institutional review boards, ethics panels, and you have none of that, or you have at least varying levels of that in the private sector. And so the tragedy of AI governance is that you have a mismatch between leverage and interest. Mm-hmm. Those with the greatest leverage have the least interest in regulation. Those with the greatest interest have almost no leverage. But I suppose it's not just the CEOs and the venture capitalists that are doing this. You mentioned in passing P-Doom. So many of the researchers up and down these companies would say, yeah, there's a whatever % chance that what I'm doing will contribute to the destruction of humanity. Why do they keep working?
That's a good question.
Why don't they have the full epiphany? They have the half epiphany that you had, but they not have a grandchild?
Again, I think we should get psychologists involved in. I'm just a computer scientist, so I can just venture some hypotheses here. So an interesting episode is when there was the crisis with Sam Altman as the CEO of OpenAI, and this all happened a week before a evaluation event for OpenAI that all of the employees, could lose a lot of money, if the value of OpenAI went down at that time. So the fact that these companies work, not only give good salaries, but there's an incentive for the employees to make sure the company is going to make a lot of money, which in general is a good thing. I'm all for that. But when the interests of the company as a profit-making organization and society diverge, then you get a problem. And we've seen what happened in the case of OpenAI.
Yeah. We've got about 10 minutes more, and we've got time for questions. It's exam season at NUS, and so for the students in the room, there is a class participation component to today's assessment. So we do have time for questions. I think a microphone will appear. Maybe while the first person is getting a microphone ready, I'll ask one more question. Which is that just in terms of the scientist AI...
I wish I could answer your questions, but they're hard questions.
Well, actually, since he's got the microphone, I'll let him ask a question first, please. And actually, I'll take 2 or 3 questions so that you can respond to all of them. So first question, please.
Yeah. First off, thank you very much, Professor Bengio, for the great talk. I'm fascinated by how some of this sounds very familiar to me, and some of it sounds a little bit different. Like you mentioned, you were talking about the training and how the models are just reacting to their training. As somebody who has a long history, not only in ML, but also I do a lot of dog training, I can tell you that your assertion that you don't run into this self-preservation problem with dogs is absolutely false. Any dog that has been poorly trained and poorly socialized has a very strong self-preservation instinct and is often very problematic.
No, I said animals have a self-preservation.
Oh, you said it has. Okay, I misinterpreted what you said.
No.
Yeah, so it's remarkably similar.
Every living thing does.
Yeah, but with pets as well, we run into this.
Yeah. But they don't kill you because they're not powerful enough.
Oh, my friend, with dogs, you have this problem. We'll talk about that afterwards. It's very poorly socialized dogs, you have this problem, and I have unfortunately seen it often. So yes, this happens with pets. And interestingly enough, when we talk about agentic AI, there's a case that's happened recently in Singapore that it sounds very similar to me, nothing to do, or very little to do with ML, even though it happened in the context of ML. There was an intern working for a very famous social media company focused on video, and they submitted a variety of code changes that they were accused of this. I don't know if this was ever been proven anywhere. And to me, this was all, from an engineering perspective, these were all poor engineering practices. How was an intern allowed to make these changes without any guardrails to prevent such things? And nobody expected an intern would act contrary to the interests of the company, contrary to what their stated purposes were. And that seems very parallel to me with what we expect out of AI.
Yes.
So how much of this is just simply that our expectations of the way AI behaves contrary to our interests just simply we need guardrails against this, and how much of this is new technology and new techniques that we need?
So maybe hold your thought. I want to get at least one more question. I think.
That's not how my brain works.
Okay, fine. No multitasking here. So if you can pass the microphone to the next client and ask.
I'll answer briefly. You're right, and we should worry that when we give the keys to our accounts, including on GitHub or whatever, to agents, which is already happening, we might have bad surprises. I'm not like too worried about this if it's just like mistakes. I'm worried about it in a bigger scheme where the AI wants to do harm, like maybe to preserve itself and, you know, hide itself and so on. So it's not the small mistakes, it's the big bad goals that we should be after.
All right, we'll take this question and then that one, and then I'm not sure if we'll have time beyond that, please.
Oh, hi, Prof. Thank you so much for the talk. I'm Jing Yu. I'm supervised by Prof. Leong and co-supervised by Prof. Tian Po. I'm a year 3 PhD student. I'm wondering on a technical question, does the goal of understanding with RL lead to self-preservation as well? And with that, would that mean that there's still the problem of the harm caused by the AI? And a follow-up question of that would be...
I can do one only.
Oh, sorry.
So yes, RL, as we do it now, can be quite problematic. And I gave quick examples. There are other examples. And I don't think we understand enough those risks. So if we train our AIs to try to achieve understanding through reward maximization, through actions in the world to, for example, acquire knowledge, we could end up with big problems as well.
All right.
Can I ask just a variation on that, which is the scientist AI, you said you just want, paraphrasing, having hypotheses but not acting.
Yes.
But a scientist tests those hypotheses.
Yes. Okay, I often get that question. Indeed. So in the paper with the same title as my talk, which you can find easily on the web, I explain how you can decompose a problem of experimental design into small, understandable pieces, understandable as in, like, we know mathematically exactly what needs to be done. Things like conditional probabilities, Bayesian probabilities, mutual information, like we can write formulas and training objectives for these things. And we can train our neural nets to do each of these things. And then we chain these things together, and we end up with a generation of candidate experiments, not candidate hypotheses. And then we can use the same guardrail, like, is the experiment not just helping to disambiguate theories, but also is it safe? Like, is it gonna harm people? If the answer is no, then we can do the experiment. So we should contrast that with an RL approach, which says, oh, I'm gonna give you reward if you do well in the future, which of course you're gonna do better if you learn more and you do experiments that teach you more, but you have no control over the pieces. And this is the end-to-end approach is actually dangerous because we don't have oversight over the decisions that are taken. But with the scientists' approach, inspired by how we actually do science, we can get around that challenge.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to have to go to the next question, otherwise we're going to run out of time.
Thank you very much. And then, my name is Martin Seeland. I would have like one question. So, like, maybe it's a drive to survive, how the LLMs try surviving or avoiding like turning off, but maybe it's like a train to survive or training how to survive, because large language models knows about evolutions and other things like these from the training data that they got. So maybe it's better to make a really just AI that just forget about evolution and anything like that. So besides jokes, like maybe a little bit like avoid training on those things which can suggest them to that they can't survive for so long.
But we're all like acting to preserve ourselves is one of the major human motivations. So that's not feasible what you're proposing. We have to find a solution that is not, oh, we're going to remove the sentences that talk about preserving yourself. It's deeper than that. You know, I gave the example of somebody applying for a job and being deceptive. Well, it's actually a survival instinct that is at play here.
Thank you. So my idea was that we have the drive to survive as
Yes.
humans, but
Yes.
then these kind of large language models and other AI solutions just training to survive because they know.
Well, they're
that's
trained
the
right now to
future.
imitate us, and of course, we want to survive. Simple as that.
Okay, so I've got to take a question front row, Brian Lowe.
I'm going to make an observation when I look at my students and even my children, and then they use generative AI. It sort of hone them into thinking in a certain way, right? And you know, in a very futuristic sense, how do you think that will lead to the effect of them losing the right to be wrong, or the right to be even to be bored?
To be bored?
To be bored, or even to be wrong, the right to be wrong, because everybody is being structured in a way that, I'm going to seek the generative AI, GPTs for a certain solution.
Right.
There's no sense of exploration anymore. But then this is exactly at where we are the best, right? When we are bored, we explore.
Right.
But in the future, would we lose such a right, even to be bored or to be wrong? Yeah.
I don't think so. I mean, we have libraries,
That's
and
true.
we have Google search. So I'm not worried about that. I'm much more worried about, you know, people blowing the planet up.
Okay, we're basically out of time, I fear, but I'm going to ask, one more question from the front row with the laptop there, please. No, with the laptop, yeah.
Thank you, Prof. I'm Yu-Tian, year 2 CS at NUS. So my question is, just now you mentioned that use non-agentic AIs to as wrappers for the agentic AIs.
Yeah.
So what challenges do you foresee for this? Like, including the technical challenges as well as the maybe societal challenges?
Right. So the technical challenges are related to how do we make sure that the meaning of words in the explanations that the AI comes to is the same as the meaning we give to words. So this is called the interpretability challenge as well. Even though the AI uses now words to come up with the explanations, potentially they could diverge from our meanings. And a societal challenge is that solution going to be computationally costly compared to not doing it? And then that may be a barrier for companies to use it.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, we've got a huge topic. I'm sure we could go on talking. I was going to ask, since this is a celebration of the 120th anniversary of NUS, what you think the role of universities might be 120 years from now, but I'll be happy if we make it to 125. Any last thoughts about what young people, in particular, interested in the space should be doing?
Right now, companies are all doing the same thing, exploring around a very little space of like solutions and methods. And the traditional road of academia is exploration. Different people have the freedom to look for different solutions. Like, these are really hard, challenging problems. And so we need more people around the world to just take a shot at these problems and then discuss it with others so that we can accelerate the solution. Maybe we don't have a lot of time, so I think more people would work on this, the better.
Okay, so don't just take an internship in a company, go do that research project over the summer, but first please join me in thanking Yoshua Bengio for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Prof. Bengio and Prof. Chesterman. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this afternoon's session, which we hope has been interesting and insightful. Do check out the video recording of this event, made available right now on our social media platforms. Thank you, and we wish you a pleasant weekend.